fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery with your hosts, Eric Shapiro, David North Martino, John Copenhaver, and Al Warren. Heard on KCAA 106.5 FM Los Angeles,
102.3 FM Riverside,
and 105.0 AM Palm Springs.
We're going to be talking about the book, I Hear You Paint Houses, and it's by Charles Brandt. And thank you for joining us today, Charles.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So now this is exciting. I've heard that this book, they've made it into a Netflix movie with all these great actors and director and everything. Yeah, that must be pretty exciting.
Oh, my God, is it exciting. It's an all-star cast. Would you like me to run it down?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, why not? Go.
All right. To start with, a young fellow by the name of Marty Scorsese is going to be directing it. And among the other youngsters in this movie are Bob De Niro. He's playing Frank the Irishman Sheeran. And Sheeran, as you may know if you've read my book, was the number one suspect in Hoffa's disappearance. And I was a lawyer, and he was my client. And we ended up spending 5 years together on tape with him confessing many, many misdeeds to me, including his role in the murder of Jimmy Hoffa. And De Niro is going to play De Niro is going to play Frank the Irishman Sheeran. Al Pacino is going to play Jimmy Hoffa. The mafia boss in charge of the hit was a man named Russell Bufalino. He was the most powerful mafia boss in America at the time, but he kept an extremely low profile. And so he's the mafia boss that most people never heard of. But you can Wikipedia him and find out just how strong he was. Anyway, his role is being played by Joe Pesci. Then Harvey Keitel is in it as the mafia boss of Philly by the name of Angelo Bruno. Ray Romano from Everybody Loves Raymond is in it, and he plays the mouthpiece. Bill Bufalino, a lawyer for the Teamsters, and on and on. The list just goes on. Anna Paquin, you remember her?
Oh yeah,
the actress. Yeah, she plays one of Frank Sheeran's daughters, Peggy Sheeran. Welker White plays Jimmy Hoffa's wife, and it's quite an all-star cast, as I said, and quite authentic. They relied heavily on the book. They had me advising and meeting with them. They had me in a hotel in New York for 2 months, and I would attend script meetings with De Niro, Scorsese, and the screenwriter Steve Zalian, who won the Oscar for Schindler's List. And so I was there to make sure that all their questions were answered. And then they began filming. When the final screenplay came to me, I told them I had no notes for it. I was overjoyed. And they shortly, a few days later, they began filming. They did most of their filming in New York City or the environs. And they assigned a researcher by the name of Mary Ann Bowers, a terrific gal, to ask me questions from time to time. I would get 2 or 3 calls a week from her. Sometimes every day I'd get a call from her. They'd be shooting a scene, and they'd want my an answer to some aspect of that scene. It was quite fascinating because I could have been in New York and gone to the set every day, but I have commitments where I live in Sun Valley, Idaho. And so here I was 3,000 miles away, helping out on the set. I finally did visit the set toward the end, and what was really fun about that for me, they were filming in a town, a New York City, one of the outlining borough towns called Ridgewood, not Ridgewood, New Jersey, but Ridgewood, Brooklyn and Queens. It's on the Brooklyn-Queens border. And I was sitting in the director's chair watching them film, and it was my hometown. I lived there till the 6th grade. And so here I was back in Ridgewood after all these years. It was fabulous.
Wow.
Anyway.
That's pretty amazing. That'd be real exciting.
Oh, my God.
It's an
unbelievable.
honor.
In fact, the hotel they had me in was on 54th Street and Broadway. And when I would leave in the morning to go to Marty Scorsese's house in Midtown Manhattan for a meeting, and I'll say something about the meeting process in a second, but if I looked to my left and looked straight down 54th Street for about 5 blocks, I would see this tall telephone company building that in 1960 I worked on. I was a timekeeper on that building. So here I had come full cycle from a $65 a week timekeeper on a construction project where I had to walk out on the beams. 5 stories below was my desk for $65. And here I am on my way to meet with Marty Scorsese at his house. Unbelievable.
Yeah, and Marty. Get to call him Marty. Wow.
Oh, I do, and I know, and I didn't intend it. It's just that's what everyone else was calling him, you know.
Yeah.
So,
No, that's great.
so that's his name.
No,
Yeah.
I'm happy for you. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Well, good book. It's just everything's in it. Now let's start with the title. I really want to start with the title. I hear you paint houses.
Sure.
Now I know what that is. I've been through the book and everything. But for the listeners that don't know, that should pick up the book. What is that title about?
Well, it is the first words that Jimmy Hoffa ever uttered to Frank the Irishman Sheeran. It was a job interview. Hoffa had just taken over as president of the Teamsters. It was around 1957. In fact, it was 1957. and he contacted Russell Bufalino in Pennsylvania for muscle. He wanted to get rid of certain enemies of his that he felt were going to hurt the labor movement by sowing dissent and disrupting solidarity. And so he wanted them eliminated. And Frank the Irishman was a hitman for Russell. Well, Russell put Frank on the phone with Hoffa. Hoffa was calling from Detroit, and they were in a mafia hangout in Philly. Russell said to Frank, say hi to your boss, Jimmy Hoffa. Hoffa got on the phone, or Frank got on the phone with Hoffa, and Hoffa uttered these words, I heard you paint houses. And those words mean, I heard you kill people. The paint is the blood that spatters on the floor when you whack somebody. And Frank responded appropriately, I do my own carpentry work too, which means I get rid of the bodies myself. And so the next day, Frank was in Detroit, flown from Philly to Detroit, and began work for Hoffa, the same kind of work he had done for Russell Bufalino. And thereafter, he split his time between Russell in the Philadelphia area and Jimmy wherever he might be, even when he went to jail. And when Hoffa disappeared, the case agent, the FBI agent in charge of the investigation, he was a man named, not that he's gone now, he's just no longer doing that line of work anymore, but his name is Bob Garrity. And he attended a book signing of mine and said, make this book out to Bob Garrity. And I said, how do I know that name? He said, I was the Hoffa case agent. I said, you're not going anywhere. And he and I became buddies. And his first words to me were, we always liked Sheeran for it. The Hoffa kids, Jimmy had a son and a daughter. The Hoffa kids thought the sun rose and set on Frank Sheeran. And that's how they do it. They get somebody that can get close enough to do the hit. They get somebody who can get close enough to the victim. And in this case, Frank was being mentored over the years in union work by Hoffa. At the same time, he was being mentored in mafia work by Russell Bufalino. And it wasn't just killing Hoffa that they made him do. And Frank said to me, if I ever said no to Russell on this matter, Jimmy would have been just as dead, and I'd have gone to Australia with him, meaning gone down under another slang expression I learned from Frank, been killed right along with him. So Frank did it. And the way you read it in the book and the setup, and not only didn't he have any choice, but they were watching his every move to make sure that he did it, and that he didn't tip Hoffa off, and that he lured Hoffa to a house in Detroit, which Frank took me to. He remembered the house, remembered exactly where it was, and I took him out to Detroit from Philly in style. I rented a Cadillac and put him in it, and off we went to Detroit and found that house. Since right after we found it, we didn't go in it. And in fact, he couldn't. His head was down. But I didn't want... he had described the house to me, and I wanted it to be discovered by others as exactly as he described it to me, the interior. And that's exactly what was found. A Fox News team under the reporter by the name of Eric Shawn went out there, gained entrance, legitimately through the then owner, a man who's passed away since by the name of Rick Wilson. And they got in there, and then they flew me out to Detroit and interviewed me and let me in that house. And it was precisely as Frank had described it, and a perfect place to kill somebody. And the body was disposed of at Bagnasco's funeral parlor in Detroit, cremated.
How do you think Frankie the Irishman felt about having to kill Hoffa?
It ruined everything about him. Changed. He was a drinker, but he became absolutely absorbed by alcohol. And believe it or not, the hardest part for him was when Russell told him he had to call Mrs. Hoffa and assure her that Jimmy would turn up, that this was okay. A prior mafia boss by the name of Joe Bananas, Joe Bonanno, known as Joe
Joseph
Bananas.
Bonanno, a man of honor.
A man of honor, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And who was that? Gay Talese wrote that book, the wonderful Gay Talese. Anyway, Frank had to call Mrs. Hoffa and tell her that just like Joe Bananas turned up, and Joe Bananas turned up like 10 months after he had been abducted by the Mafia Commission, had felt that Banana needed a lesson. He didn't need to be killed, but he needed a lesson. And so they picked him up. They took him to a place in Arizona. He was their captive for 10 months. And then an agreement was made that he would stay in Arizona, would not return to New York City, would not seek to regain his position on the commission, the governing body of the mafia, and would share certain profits that he had been hoarding. And so Frank made that call to Mrs. Hoffa, and it was the worst moment of his life, as he expressed it to me. You know, he was a part of that family. Mrs. Hoffa loved him. He loved her. And here he had to call her up and lie to her. And his words to me were, what kind of man does that? What can you say? I mean, one of the techniques. Oh, by the way, not that it's an oh, by the way, but my field was interrogation and cross-examination as a trial lawyer, and before that as the Chief Deputy Attorney General of the state of Delaware, where I personally was involved in over 50 homicides. And I taught interrogation to cops. I taught cross-examination to other trial lawyers. And so from time to time, I had to use my techniques on Frank. And one of the techniques that an interrogator does to loosen the lip of the murderer is to blame the victim, that the victim had it coming. And that takes some of the guilt off your subject that you're interrogating. And so and it was true in this case. Hoffa helped get himself killed. He just couldn't control the threats he was making against organized crime. He was threatening to get back the Union, take it back, and get his hands on the records and demonstrate that under the previous president, Frank Fitzsimmons, the mafia had infiltrated the Teamsters Union. And you don't talk like that. You don't talk like that about these people, these very powerful people. In fact, when Frank tried to warn him, Hoffa's response was, they wouldn't dare. When Frank said to him, Russell told me to tell you what it is, which means what it is means you're going to be killed. And Frank's reply, Hoffa's reply was, they wouldn't dare.
Well, that's arrogance on his part.
Yeah, in talking that way,
now they have to make a point.
He was asking for it, so to speak, and I played that angle with Frank. The other angle I played with Frank was that Frank was raised a very strict Catholic. His father had studied 5 years for the priesthood. He didn't finish, but he had studied for 5 years, and then his mother went to Mass every single morning, early Mass of his life. And I had been raised a Catholic as well, and so I used that on Frank in our discussions. I talked religion with him, and it kept him talking. On tape, by the way. All of it's on tape, and the FBI has my tapes. I'm proud to say. They know it's all true, but because there are still 2 suspects from the original conspiratorial gang that did this, a man named Tommy Andretta, who lives in Las Vegas, and a man named Chucky O'Brien is not really his name. His name is Pagano, his last name. He was Italian, but he lives in Boca Raton, Florida. And as long as the case is an active case, the FBI won't comment on it. But don't worry about it.
Now, when you say though that
what'd you say, sir?
When you say that you played certain angles, though, let's go back to the Catholicism.
Sure.
Just a curiosity for me, because what I know of the mob and the mob lifestyle, they were very active in their churches, and they gave large amounts of money to their churches.
Many did.
Now I'm choosing my words very carefully. But would you say that maybe their heavy involvement in the church, was that a cover-up? Like he wouldn't dare do something like that. He's a really good Catholic. Or was that kind of a self-resolution? Like, let me balance my karmic scales here because I'm doing all these, things over here. Let me give heavily to the church so that maybe I can kind of resolve this with myself.
Well, for sure, Frank was Frank the Irishman Sheeran. He had a sense of morality inside him from his early training in that religion. He went to all Catholic schools, and one day he was moved to return to his faith when he was in jail. He was at the Springfield Prison Hospital in Missouri, And Russell Bufalino happened to be there at the same time. Russell was nearing the end of his life, and he had an 11-year sentence, and he was serving it, most of it at the prison hospital, and then they allowed him to serve the rest of it not in his home, in a motel that he owned near his home, Howard Johnson's Hotel in Pennsylvania. Well, one day by the bocce court, you know what bocce is?
Enlighten me.
Well, it's an Italian game played with balls, and it's like bowling.
Oh, yes. Okay, I'm sorry.
On a court. And the other thing that I played was I'm Italian. My last name isn't. My father was not, but he was a part of the large Italian family. He had, the good old melting pot. Well, my father melted into the Italian family so that I was raised Italian. My mother had 9 brothers and sisters, and my grandparents had a little farm in Staten Island. My grandfather had a horse and wagon and peddled the produce that he grew. And that's how I was raised myself. And Frank spent a lot of time in Italy during World War II. He also lived in Italian neighborhoods in Philly, and he got to speak fluent Italian. And then he just fit right in with these Italians. Well, one day at Springfield Hospital, Frank was near the bocce court watching the bocce game, and all of a sudden along comes Russell in a wheelchair, and he's being wheeled up into the chapel. And Frank laughs like, what are you doing going to chapel? And Russell said to him, "Don't laugh, my Irish friend. When you get to be my age, you'll see that there's more to this life than we know." And Russell was the first one to have what is known in Catholicism as a deathbed conversion. As you're nearing the end of your life, you convert. And another one Frank had was the foxhole conversion. He had that during the war. He spent 411 combat days when the average was 80. He was in the entire war from start to finish in Europe. And,
hey, I've been there. What do they say? There's not a such thing as an atheist in a foxhole.
Correct. And he had a foxhole conversion. He said, we prayed we would give up every vice, you could imagine,
And until the bullets stop flying.
Yeah.
So now fast forwarding, it's always been a mystery to me. I've read a lot about Hoffa, and everybody is very familiar, with, well, Hoffa is under the home plate at such and such stadium and this and that. But what did Hoffa actually do to cross the mob?
To cross the mob, did you say?
Yes, sir. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me quickly address the Giant Stadium. That is a well-known myth that he was buried in Giant Stadium. Well, Bob Garrity told me that they actually checked that with the device that
ground penetrating
a radar kind of radar kind of device. And the reason they checked it is that Russell Bufalino, who owned a piece of an awful lot of businesses, owned a piece of the architectural firm that built Giant Stadium. Mm-hmm. And so they had to check it. Of course, they found nothing, but they had to check it.
Well, I'm surprised Geraldo didn't do a big special on it.
Yeah. Well, they didn't let reporters near there while they were doing it, but they did it. Anyway, you asked what did Hoffa do? A couple of things. The first thing was that when he was in prison, Hoffa got 11 years worth of sentences. And when he went to prison, he was still, because of the crimes for which he was convicted, he was still entitled to receive his lump sum pension of $1.5 million.
Jeez.
while at the same time, a prominent mafioso in New York, a capo in the Genovese family, Tony Provenzano, a.k.a. Tony Pro, was not allowed to get his pension. He went to jail with Hoffa, Lewisburg Prison. It's the jail that's depicted in the movie Goodfellas.
Mm-hmm.
And but Pro was not allowed to get his pension because of the nature of the crimes he was convicted of. For extortion, you don't get your pension.
Well,
For
geez,
labor
but $1.5
racketeering-
million. Al, we're doing it wrong.
Yeah. Actually, that was. I think Jimmy's was more than that. $1.5 million was Tony Pro's. I don't remember what Jimmy's was. So Pro wanted Jimmy to pull strings and get him his $1.5 million, and Jimmy refused to do it. They ended up bickering in prison, and Jimmy, always outspoken, said it's people like you that have got me in trouble in the first place. What are you talking about, people like me? What kind of disrespect is that? The two of them ended up having a fist fight in prison. From that moment on, Tony Pro, who had been a Hoffa ally, he was actually a vice president of the Teamsters, strong for Hoffa. From that point, he had made a tremendous enemy out of Tony Pro, and therefore out of the Genovese family, and therefore out of the commission, because the Genovese family was on the ruling body of the mafia. And little by little, they pecked away at Hoffa until finally Russell gave in, Russell Bufalino,
Mm-hmm.
and agreed to get rid of Hoffa. And he planned it from start to finish. Planned it to take an hour. I don't want to give the people the notion that this book is more like a newspaper headline. It's a biography. It's all about Frank the Irishman Sheeran from the cradle to the grave. In fact, my last confession that I got from him was in Lankenau Hospital, and this one was on video. All the others were on audio tape, and he had agreed to do one on videotape for me, and that was his final confession. And he then chose to kill himself by not eating, and 6 weeks later he was dead.
What a way to go!
Yeah. Apparently, it's not that uncommon in nursing homes. He was in a nursing home by then, but as a means to end it all. A man who had chosen the life expectancy of 25 to 30 people, and that he confessed 25 to 30 hits to me, including Crazy Joey Gallo, which is a more famous in New York than it probably is in Seattle, but you could look him up. Crazy Joey Gallo was one crazy dude, and Frank killed him at Umberto's Clam House in New York City's Little Italy area. What's interesting about that is in the book, there's a photograph, a table full of beer bottles, and at the head of the table is Frank Sheeran and me. And I'm moving toward Frank Sheeran, obviously holding something under the table. That was my tape recorder. Frank had just confessed at that moment to killing Crazy Joey Gallo. Well, we spent more time on that. I spent a lot of time with Frank, and we spent, I had 5 years. I had him to myself for 5 years. And so I was able to use my skills to make sure I was getting the truth out of him. And when he said that he had killed Gallo, I said, now that can't be, because the story out there on the street is that 3 Italians burst into Umberto's and killed Gallo. And it was not a lone 6'4", 220-pound Irishman, the toughest guy you'll ever meet. It was 3 Italians, and they made 2 movies. On Everybody Loves Raymond, there's the father. I can't think of his Boyle. Is
it Ed Asner? No, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Anyway,
you got me.
He starred as Crazy Joey in one of the movies, and I forget who starred in the other. There were two movies, and in both of them, they had three Italian men burst into Umberto's and kill him. Plus, in about 8 to 10 books, I had to read them all. You know, the same version was that three Italian gunmen burst in and killed Gallo. And when my book came out, the national assignment editor at the time for the New York Times saw the book, saw the photograph in the book of Frank Sheeran, and she said, I was there that night when it happened. There was no three gunmen. There was only one, and it was this man in that picture. So then there were others that came forward. Somebody found an old newspaper article of the then chief of detectives, Al Seidman in New York City, came out and announced to the assembled newspaper reporters that all this was the work of a lone gunman. So, anyway, if anybody ever needed to know whether Frank was telling the truth or not, just look at that Gallo story in the book.
What about his? He claimed to have knowledge about the JFK assassination.
Yep,
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a story here that I think you'll be interested in. And if you read an earlier version of the book, it doesn't have this story in it. The latest version of the book has a 57-page conclusion chapter that has this story in it, and you'll hear why I didn't put it in it, and you won't blame me for that. I got Frank out of jail in 1991. That was when I first began to have contact with him. And he said to me that I had written a book on interrogation called The Right to Remain Silent, St. Martin's Press. It did very well, and it came out when he was in prison. He was serving a 32-year sentence, and I got him out on medical grounds. He had severe spinal stenosis, and he needed surgery. And when I got him out, he took me to lunch. Well, he took my whole office to lunch, along with his crowd of 8 guys named Rocco sitting at a mafia hangout, Vincenti's. And after the lunch, he took me aside, and he said that I'm tired of being written about in all the books on Hoffa. They all say I had something to do with Jimmy's disappearance. I read your book in jail, and I want you to write a book for me that proves that I didn't have anything to do with Hoffa's disappearance. Well, in my field of interrogation, when somebody says that to you and uses those words and certain inflections, you get an immediate hunch that this guy has something he wants to get off his mind, off his chest. And it turned out he did. He hated himself for having to kill Hoffa. And so I met with him, and a few days later I went to his apartment in Springfield, Pennsylvania, and began allowing him to get it off his chest. We spent 5 hours together in that first meeting. And one of the techniques you use as an interrogator is you want the subject to keep talking. You don't want him to stop and start considering, gee, what did I just say? You know? And so if there's a lull, you want to egg it on. You don't care if he talks about the color of his date's prom dress when he went to the prom. You just want words to come out of his mouth, and you know and you have faith that if enough words come out of his mouth, the truth has its own way of coming out. So at one point there was a lull, and I didn't want that lull, and so I said to him, Frank, how come there were so many people involved in this? You gave me 8 names. Tony Giacalone, Tommy Andretta, Steve Andretta, Chucky O'Brien, Tony Provenzano, Russell Bufalino. I'm missing 2. Oh, Sal Bergoglio. Missing one more. But, I said them out loud to him. You gave me these names. Why so many? Now, I knew the answer to that. I knew that there was more than one answer to that. But I knew the answer, but I just wanted him talking. And he said, well, that way, if you go bad, meaning if you turn state's evidence someday and become a cooperating witness for the FBI, if you go bad, that way you only know what you did. You don't know what the others did before you and the others did after you.
Right. Keep everything in compartments. Compartmentalize.
Yeah. Compartmentalize. So I said, yeah. And I had seen a movie years earlier, many years earlier. I was 19 when I'd seen the movie. I saw it in Atlantic City, New Jersey. There was an attraction called the Steel Pier in Atlantic City, and us guys from New York City would take the bus over to Atlantic City for the day. And one of the things they had was a movie theater that you didn't have to pay to go into. And they would play movies that opened nowhere. And there was a movie that I saw where a hitman takes the train to New York from Cleveland to kill a mafioso in Cleveland. And when the hitman goes to collect his money, he's rubbed out.
Oh, no.
The name of the movie is Blast of Silence. So I said to Frank, it seems to me also that if you did this by yourself, you stand a good chance of being killed yourself. And Frank said, well, you'd have to be out of your mind to do this by yourself. They're not going to have a massacre, but the lone cowboy is disposable, and they will dispose of a lone cowboy. And I said very innocently, just to keep the dialogue going, you mean like Lee Harvey Oswald, the lone cowboy? And all of a sudden, Frank began to listen and began to stare and began to turn to granite. And I realized I was onto something. And I moved in closer. And I said to him, he was sitting on a lazy boy. I moved in closer and I said that clearly it was Jack Ruby's job to get rid of Oswald after the assassination. He was supposed to get rid of him on the street. And the more I'm talking, the scareder this giant of a man, fearless man, began to look. And with his right hand, he began to kind of wave me away. It was on the edge of the lazy boy. And he's waving me away. He can't even come up with words. And I'm going on that there's a lot worse in this world than facing a judge for killing Oswald. If you were supposed to get rid of him on the street, and Ruby had cops, and you're supposed to use your cops to get rid of him on the street, and you don't, you'll be tortured to death, Chicago style. And finally, he utters these words, I'm not going anywhere near Dallas.
Oh.
Jesus Christ, thought I. Neither am I.
Not with what you know now.
Well, not, and certainly not, and not at that moment. I was willing to risk it to find out what happened to Hoffa. But are you kidding me? And I knew that from my work as a prosecuting attorney and a homicide investigator, I knew that these bad guys taped each other. They wiretapped each other. And so, for all I knew, that room was bugged. And as soon as those words sunk in, and he's staring at me with these eyes of his, I quickly changed the subject, and I said, so then, in other words, they used so many men because it was like an assembly line. In other words, you only knew what you did. Is that what you're saying, Frank? And he said, that's right. So I knew it was time for me to get the hell out of there. I said, well, I think we're done for now. I'm going to type up these notes. Yeah, I wasn't making notes, but I'm going to type up something on this, what they call a treatment, and I'll show it to you. Well, I typed it up, and he had given me 80% of what happened to Hoffa. He did not admit that he pulled the trigger, but at that time, nobody even knew there was a gun involved. You know, nobody knew how he was killed, except I knew at that moment. You know.
Yeah. Well. So
I typed it. Go ahead.
Well, when it comes to Hoffa, have they ever closed the case? Do we know what?
No. They can't close it because there are two of the original members of the conspiracy that are still alive. Tommy Andretta lives in Las Vegas, and Chucky O'Brien lives in Boca Raton, Florida. So they haven't closed the case, but they have subpoenaed my tapes, and they turned when Russell Bufalino died, his job as boss of the Bufalino family was taken over by a man named Billy D'Elia, who, by the way, didn't like me during that 5 years I spent with Frank.
Yeah, well, you're asking too many questions. That's just the mob.
Well, no, he didn't. No, Frank told them that I was writing a book, clearing him. So that's what they were being led to believe. I don't know that Billy D'Elia ever really believed it. But in the meantime, I was getting serial confessions from Frank. So anyway, getting back to the JFK matter, I typed up what he told me, 80% of what happened to Hoffa, named the names, but did not include anything about JFK. Frank read it, and he turned to stone again, and he said, you can't use this. These people are still alive. Russell was still alive then. All of them were still alive. Tony Giacalone. And he said, you can't use this. I'm taking it. Well, he took it, but of course it was a copy that I had of, this was 1991, and believe it or not, we had computers then, and you know, I had it typed on a computer. So he took that one from me, and I said, well, Frank, if you change your mind about any of this or any of these people die, and you want to talk to me some more, you know where to find me. And that ended everything for 8 years. 8 years later, his daughter Dolores took him to for a Catholic ritual of absolution, a confession. She took him to Monsignor Heldesor of St. Dorothy's Church in Springfield, Pennsylvania, and he confessed to the priest. You don't have to confess in detail to get absolution. And after that, he called me up and wanted to continue where we left off 8 years before. And he wanted to do more confessing. He ended up confessing to 3 priests. In fact, in the movie, they have used a real Catholic priest, a Father Jonathan from the Bronx, and the real ritual. And Father Jonathan said to me that when you confess 3 times to 3 different priests to the same crimes, you got remorse. You're feeling remorse. So that was where we left JFK. But when he returned to me 8.5 years later, I pressed him on the JFK, and I got some interesting stuff that's in the book. That's why I say this book is not just a one-shot headline of what happened to Jimmy Hoffa. This is a book about a very interesting man and a very sad man at the end of his life. Did I mention I was a pallbearer at his funeral?
No.
And I was a pallbearer at his funeral, and he had he bought himself a green casket for the Irish. So, and right now the movie, the book is called I Heard You Paint Houses. The movie, financed by Netflix, it'll open in theaters, but very likely it will open in theaters and then go to streaming it with Netflix. But they haven't decided on whether they continue to call it The Irishman or go back to I Heard You Paint Houses, which is what Bob De Niro said in an article in an interview for CNN, that he and Marty wanted to return to the original book title, from The Irishman to I Heard You Paint Houses.
I think it's more catchy. I Hear You Paint Houses. It lends to question, what are they talking about? I need to watch this to find out. The Irishman,
Well,
you start thinking of Mark Wahlberg.
That's how I feel. That's how my wife feels. My kids feel. We all hope they settle in on I Heard You Paint Houses. So.
Now, in your book, you cover more of his younger age too, don't you?
Yeah, I take him from the cradle to the grave practically. He had a very rough childhood. His father was kind of a brutal man. His father was an amateur boxer and a steel worker in Philly. He's one of those men that climb up there and position the beams into place, Not a long life expectancy for a lot of those men, but he was a drinker and a tough guy. And Frank was the oldest of 3 children. He had a sister and a kid brother. And Frank was the one that bore the brunt of his father's abuse. And if Frank did something wrong at school, the father made Frank put the gloves on. And he was not allowed to hit back, but he could defend himself. So Frank, learned how to defend himself at least. And he said that to me, whatever I want to say about my father, he certainly prepared me for the life that I later had and prepared me for the war. I mentioned earlier Frank was in 411 combat days. I didn't mention including Anzio, 4 months under constant heavy bombardment at Anzio. A crazy period in America's past. The way that was handled by the generals. And he was there for it. He helped liberate the concentration camp Dachau, and also the concentration camp in the Harz Mountains.
So now,
quite a lot of experience.
Do you have a website
and that's
or something?
Unfortunately, I don't. My website went down, and we're in the process of trying to get it back up. But my publisher has a website, Steerforth Press.
Okay.
And so
we'll post that up with the book as well. It's something that's really important, so people can just one click and buy it.
Yeah, they can get it on Amazon easily.
Yeah.
Again, one click and buy it. I wanted to also say something about Billy D'Elia.
Okay.
The last boss of the Bufalino crime family. As you know, and your followers may know, the mafia took a big hit by Rudy Giuliani in the 1980s in New York, and essentially they were put out of business, a slow death, little by little by little by little, till there really was no more commission. And
I like how you put that.
And Billy D'Elia became the boss, succeeded Bufalino when Bufalino died. But by the time Billy became boss, things were falling apart. And Billy, while boss, was arrested for money laundering, Costa Rican drug money, drug dealers. Billy had 2 investment bankers that he used to launder that money. And the 2 investment bankers decided to turn state's evidence against and save themselves and testify against Billy. Well, Billy immediately put out a hit on them. And the guy he gave the hit to kill these 2 investment bankers had already become an FBI informant and a FBI cooperator. And so he was wired. And here's Billy giving instructions to kill Frank Pavlico and another guy. I don't remember the other guy's name. And it's all being wired. It's all being tape recorded by the FBI. So now they arrest Billy for conspiracy to commit murder, conspiracy to kill 2 government witnesses. In addition to the money laundering, he's going to go away forever. And instead, he decides to become a cooperating witness. And so he joins the FBI, and they go to the prison to meet with him. And the first question they ask him is, what happened to Hoffa? And he said, read that book. That's what happened to Hoffa. He had given a copy of the book to Frank Pavlico, the man whose name I mentioned earlier, the investment banker. When the book first came out, he had given a copy to Frank Pavlico, and he autographed it, "Sometimes you can believe everything you read."
So it's a testimonial.
And yeah, and Frank Pavlico told me that story. He also told the FBI that story, but he told me that story. And that is now a blurb on the book, courtesy Billy D'Elia, former boss of the Bufalino crime family. Sometimes you can believe everything you read. I got another blurb from an interesting man who's an actor and a musician. He's in Bruce Springsteen's E Street Band. His name is Steve Van Zandt. He also starred on Sopranos, and he also stars in a TV show called Lillehammer, about a mafioso who goes to Lillehammer, Norway, to live and try to escape from his past life. Well, anyway, he's in the movie, and I met him at the rap party, and he said, "You wrote that book?" I said, "That's right." He said, "That is by far the best mafia book I ever read, and I read them all." I said, "Steve, can I quote you on that, on the book jacket?" He said, "You sure can." So that also appears on the book jacket. These were later on quotes. There were some initial quotes that were fabulous to begin with. Professor Arthur Sloan, a professor of labor law, who read the book and unsolicited wrote me a letter telling me, "You have solved the Hoffa mystery." Do you remember a fellow who he was a medical examiner of the city of New York, and he had a TV show on HBO called Autopsy.
Oh, yeah.
And he showed
Bauden. Yeah. Michael Bauden.
Michael Bauden. Same thing. He gave me the same quote, that you have solved the Hoffa mystery. This was early on when the book came out in 2004, but it takes a while. We had so many bad Hoffa books and so many ridiculous stories like Giant Stadium,
Yeah.
that it took a while for it to catch on. And now it's on forever. Once this is the book that brought together Scorsese and De Niro, brought them back together along with Pesci after 9 years that they didn't make a movie together. And then to add Al Pacino to it and all the rest of them, it's quite something. And they've been a part of it, because normally the writer of the book that the movie is adapted from has no role. Once they buy the rights, they own the rights, and they don't want any monkey business. They don't want any advice from anyone. They know what they're doing. They're artists with their own vision. Well, after a couple of meetings with me, they were comfortable that I wasn't that kind of guy. I was not in their line of work, nor did I want to be. So I wrote about the mafia. I've had 4 books published, and 3 of them were about the mafia. You remember the movie Donnie Brasco, or the book Donnie Brasco?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Well, Joe Pistone is the real Donnie Brasco. He infiltrated the Bonanno family for 6 years, and risking his life every moment of those 6 years. And he had written the book, Donnie Brasco, My Life Undercover, and he had more material that he didn't use in the first book, because that material were cases that were still active, like I mentioned earlier, with respect to I Heard You Paint Houses, and why the Hoffa case has not been closed. Well, some of the Donnie Brasco work had not been closed. Well, finally, when it was closed and the people went to jail and whatever, he had more material, and he loved. In fact, he gave me a quote for the book, I Heard You Paint Houses. He said, "Charlie, if those mafia guys you were rubbing up against had any idea what Sheeran was confessing to you on a regular basis, you'd have both been promptly whacked." And that's in the book now as a blurb. Anyway, he wanted to write a book with the unused material, and I wrote it, called Donnie Brasco Unfinished Business. And then he introduced me to the supervisory special agent of the New York office of the FBI, who brought down the commission in the Mafia Commission case, working under Rudy Giuliani. And I did a book with him, Lynn DeVecchio, called We're Going to Win This Thing. So I've become a bit of a mafia expert, mostly from Frank. Yeah. Frank was my
pretty
teacher.
Amazing.
And when Frank would say to me, "You can't write that. What I just told you, you can't write that. Those people are still alive, and even though what I told you was about Russell, and Russell's dead, these people were in that with Russell, and they got to figure, if I would talk that way about Russell, as close as Russell and I were, what did I say about them? So you can't use that." There was a lot of material that only through the passage of time and other people dying or going to jail. You ever heard of Joey the Clown Lombardo, the head of the Chicago outfit?
No.
I can't say that I have.
Well, you could look him up. He was the boss, the last boss in Chicago, and he ultimately went to jail. But he used to call Frank regularly. I'd be sitting with Frank in his apartment, and Joey would call, and they would talk their kind of talk, right in front of me. And I never mentioned that, until the latest version of the book with Joey in prison, and now Billy D'Elia having turned state's evidence. I was no longer as concerned about them, and maybe I should still be, but
Well, I'll tell you, Charles, it's been an amazing, amazing conversation. Really enjoy it. Your book is I Hear You Paint Houses. And our guest has been Charles Brandt. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
To find out more about our show, guests, or to listen to past shows from our archive, please go to www.houseofmysteryradio.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Well, good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.